Hello and welcome to my channel. A while back I took up cross-stitching and coincidentally also got into Pokemon, so I decided to stitch a small spread of Eevee and all of the eeveelution sprites. I figured I could make a longer video where I put all the parts together, so enjoy the incoming trial and error process video of this project. I had a ton of people asking me where I got the patterns from, and I was just able to find them on Pinterest. I found a grid of each sprite I wanted to use and just threw them into Procreate to painstakingly put them all together as equally spaced as I could. I swear this took hours because I couldn't quite figure out the orientation and they're all different sizes, so it was hard to match them up. But eventually I got started stitching. The patterns I was using did not have any assigned DMC thread colors or anything like that, so I matched every color by hand from my stash of thread. I like to begin projects from the middle by folding it in half and finding the center, then matching it up to the design. Usually it works pretty well, but I somehow was just really off on the centering, which causes problems for me later on. But for now, I am blissfully unaware of the approaching frustration this project will spiral me into. Eevee was the smallest sprite, so I was able to finish it pretty quickly. I decided to make Vaporeon next, and I got to work matching up all those vibrant blues and yellows to start stitching. This sprite was completed during my new project hyperfixation period, so I stayed up really late stitching both this one and Eevee because I was so excited to work on it. During this time, I figured going forward I would sort of work my way around, only stitching the Eevees right next to each other so I could use the sprite beside it as reference for placement. Pretty soon I was all finished stitching Vaporeon and ready to move on to Espeon. Now, this sprite. I had major beef with this sprite. You know how I just said I was going to make sure the placement was good? Well, I didn't do a very good job because I got through a good chunk of the main body color before realizing it was off by one stitch and I had to pull out the entire thing and redo it. I also had a lot of issues with the purples I chose because they looked like they would be perfect on the skeins, but when I actually used them I just really didn't like how it looked. So again, lots of trial and error before I eventually settled on what you see here. Honestly, this turned out to be my least favorite of the sprites. The colors are okay, but I was really just trying to use what I had instead of buying more threads, so I made it work. It looks much better on camera than in real life. With Espeon out of the way, I started on Glaceon. This one was another case of really pretty, vibrant, satisfying blues to stitch with. It went pretty smoothly up until I got to these gray stitches and I decided that I didn't like it. I needed a darker blue to contrast those other dark blue stitches on the tail and feet, but I didn't have one. So I did what any other crafter in the middle of the night would do, and I got out some brush tip markers and water to dye some blue thread darker. And honestly, 10 out of 10 worked really well, very women in STEM of me. I let the thread dry and was able to finish out the Glaceon sprite the next day. Next up was Jolteon. As I worked through stitching this one, I eventually had the same problem I did with Glaceon, in that I didn't like how much gray there was and I wanted to keep the gray in the mane of the sprite for the shading since it's white. I substituted out some darker yellow thread for the body color, and this pattern also had the inside of the ears and eyes gray as well. For that, I decided to use this dark purple that you can see in other official Jolteon sprites. And I think that looked so much better as a nice pop of complementary color against that yellow. Overall, I do wish I used a more vibrant yellow for this sprite, but I think it turned out pretty well anyway. Moving on to the next sprite, I chose Leafeon. Leafeon's sprite was so incredibly satisfying to stitch because, unlike Espeon, I had the perfect colors of thread already on hand to put this one together. The sprite is really wide, so I did have to move the hoop over, which I was trying to avoid doing to not fray this edge, but it had to be done. This is where my blender with centering started to come into play because this one was super close to the edge of the cloth. But it was so nice adding in those shades of green because that's when it really started coming together. I finished stitching the outline last as per usual, and then I was ready to stitch Umbreon. This sprite had me doing way too much with overthinking the color scheme, especially with how simple it is. It was kind of difficult because the body had two shades of really dark gray, so they needed to be able to have contrast against each other for shading, but also not so dark that they overpower the black outline of the sprite. Eventually I picked out some colors that worked well together and I was finally able to start stitching. Umbreon and Jolteon both had a lot of gray in their sprites, which I didn't have a good selection of, so I did end up having to get a few new skeins of thread for both of them. I was really worried working on Umbreon, but I'm happy that the darker colors turned out good and they don't blend together into a big mess. At this point I have two left and I decided to do Flareon next. With Flareon, I did mess up again with the colors and had to redo some work, but it wasn't too bad and I was back on track pretty quickly. At this point I had to take it completely out of the hoop because it wouldn't fit anymore, so I was struggling a little bit to hold it and still get good footage. Like I said earlier, I'm a sucker for the really saturated vibrant sprites because I love the pop of color, and Flareon is definitely one of the brightest. Once again, like I did with Jolteon, I switched out those inner ear and eye colors to a complementary dark blue visible in other sprites. This is actually the same blue I used for Glaceon that I dyed, so I was happy to be able to use it again. It made it a little more worth it that my fingers were stained blue by the marker water for a few days. And in my own personal opinion, I saved the best for last with Sylveon. I really love all of the eeveelutions, but Sylveon is one of my favorites. This one was the tallest sprite out of all of them, and I think had the biggest variety of colors. Similar to Leafeon, I had a perfect array of colors ready to use, and I was really excited to get to work on this one. Well, aside from all these white stitches that are nearly impossible to see against a white background. It felt like forever stitching all of those, and it was a relief to have them over with. But yeah, I love Sylveon's pink and blue color scheme, it's just so pretty, and the final product was so worth it. Here are the last few stitches, and with that, I was officially done with the cross-stitch part of this project. I worked on this a little bit every day for about a week, so it took quite a while despite being so small, especially with all the times I messed up and had to redo stitches. And upcoming is the final process, framing the piece. Now, I have no idea how I managed this because I measured the piece while I was working on it and I figured out it would need a roughly 6x6 inch frame. So before I went any further, I made sure that size frame actually exists, which it does. But then came the journey of running all over town, going to a billion different stores trying to find that size frame, and I cannot find it anywhere. So eventually I just gave up and had to order one online. After a few agonizing days, the frame was finally in my possession. So first, I knew I was going to have to backstitch along this edge because it was fraying pretty badly and I didn't want it to get any worse. I used the frame as a template to fold in the edges, then backstitched along the right and left side of the project. That took a while, as you can imagine, and since the top and bottom seemed fine and had a lot of extra cloth, I decided to just fold it into the frame as it was. I just made sure the design was centered. I then had the joy of savoring the peelies on both sides of this plexiglass before assembling the frame back together. And here is the final reveal! I really love how this project came out, and I honestly could not recommend cross-stitch enough for anyone who wants to try it out. It's super easy to learn, and there are so many free available patterns if you don't want to make your own, especially from games like Pokemon and Stardew Valley because the pixel art is really easy to turn into a pattern. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I know this isn't my usual style of content since I normally just do commentary, but I do enjoy making process videos and it's something that I would like to explore more in the future, especially since I also crochet. Once again, thank you for watching and I will see you in my next video. Bye!